Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're going to discuss about the right time to purchase orchids, or actually the ideal time. We always talk about the ideal time to repot, ideal time for them to bloom, the ideal time of day to water them, but is there such a thing as the ideal time of the year when we should purchase certain orchids? Well, let's just say I'm a little bit more careful with that from now on, and I'll give you some examples and my impression on the subject. Now let me start off by saying that of course orchids can be bought anytime. When you see it for sale, it's a rare orchid, you really wanted it, I would be inclined to buy it as well, of course. And for the main part, probably the vast majority of your orchids will be okay, no matter the time of year when you buy them. But there are certain orchids with certain requirements who I think will do a little bit better if they are purchased in particular times of the year. And I am not referring here to off-season orchids, those orchids which bloom in the wrong season because the nurseries force them. What I am referring to is related more to growth pattern and orchid requirements. So let me tell you what I mean. Let's start with growth pattern. I was saying in a previous video that Catasetum orchids, in my opinion, are best purchased in autumn, winter, or early spring. These are seasons when these orchids are about to go into their dormancy, are already in the dormancy, or are just coming out. It's not growing season for them. The reason that I'm saying it's better to purchase them this way is because you can actually repot these orchids in their dormancy or when they're coming out of the dormancy. Repotting a Catasetum orchid due to whatever reason you find necessary to repot can be damaging for the orchid in full growing season. So if you purchase a Catasetum in full growing season and you have the bad luck to discover you have awful medium and you would really like to repot, you risk staling the orchid quite a lot. Probably you will not have blooms that year. On the long run, the orchid might be affected as well. You're gonna stress it in full growing season. Because this orchid usually creates one single pseudobulb per year, it might mean that the other pseudobulbs will not grow taller and bigger like it's supposed to. They might stale as well for 2 years if you add up all this time. So you can see how purchasing these orchids in full growing season can be okay if you have the fortune to buy an orchid in proper medium, a medium you are used to or are okay with. But sometimes you can get that orchid which simply needs repotting, and repotting in growing season is not what you want to do. So for this reason, my Catasetum orchids will probably be purchased mostly in autumn, winter, if I can find a source that doesn't have freezing winters, and most probably in early spring. Another example of purchasing orchids in their right season is the Dendrobium Nobile. We can find this orchid normally in stores no matter the season, but they are artificially induced into blooming. Nothing wrong with purchasing them, but they will spend some time adapting probably to our environment. And the problem is not the blooms, but it just so happens that these orchids start to create new growth when they are in bloom or shortly after they're done blooming. So usually in the spring, summer, and autumn, the Dendrobium Nobile will keep growing and maturing its growth. If the new growths start in autumn, let's say, they will develop in winter, and in certain climates, the winters can be quite cold, gloomy, the days can be very short, and obviously, what I'm just saying right now refers to those climates who do have a different winter and summer. If you are living in a climate with pretty constant weather, this is not such an issue. I can see how other issues might arise, but at least what I'm saying today doesn't necessarily apply to you. So I personally tend to prefer buying Dendrobium Nobile orchids and other type of dendrobiums who have the same growth pattern in the springtime. Because like that, I am sure that that new growth will have the rest of the spring, summer, and maybe a bit of autumn to fully mature. And in these seasons, we are prone to having most sunny days and of course warmer temperatures in a temperate climate or subtropical climate. So these were two examples that were related to the pattern of growth of an orchid. But there are some other examples that are more related to the preferences of the orchids. So recently I purchased some new orchids, new species that I've never owned before, and I did my research. Apparently these types of orchids prefer the cooler, intermediate rather than warm and hot. Problem is, my environment can get a little bit hot during summertime. It's a matter of 2 months per year which are critical, but other than that, things are pretty warm, intermediate, and then in winter they get cold. And judging from my past experience with orchids, they can be quite tolerant to some extremes, as long as the extremes are not too extreme and your orchid is established and healthy. So with an orchid that prefers rather cool or intermediate temperatures, I am more inclined to purchase it in a cool or intermediate season, because this should give a good environment for this orchid to grow, but more importantly, it will not stress it while it's starting to acclimate to your new medium, to the new pot, and everything that has to do with your environment. If you eliminate the stress of temperature, the orchid will have more energy to acclimate to other things like humidity, potting medium, and so on. So practically the transition from its nursery environment to your environment theoretically should be smoother. Now imagine if I purchased an intermediate to cool grower in full summer. It will definitely spend time adjusting to the temperature as well. And maybe in normal conditions, that orchid can be tolerant and quite okay in those temperatures, but because she's spending time adjusting to other factors of my environment, there is a chance that all of these factors together can mean a staling orchid or a not so happy orchid. And I had a case. It was the Nelly Eiler, which is rather a cool to intermediate grower. I purchased her in full summer, and she is now dead, and I am presuming it was adapting to everything plus temperature. Now, as I was saying, there are orchids who can withstand some extremes, as long as these extremes are not over the top. But I am suspecting that the more established an orchid is, the better it will handle those extremes. So what I tend to do now is purchase the intermediate or cooler growers in my cool seasons rather than purchasing them in full summer. No matter how much I run my AC, in the nighttime I simply cannot keep it on because the bill would be quite large. So they would still have to suffer a little bit in the nighttime. And I just believe that overall these orchids will do much better for me if they are purchased in a season that would be favorable for their preferences. And when the summer comes for those critical 2 months of the year, they will be better prepared to handle them. Doesn't mean they will be the happiest orchids, but at least they will be established, they would have grown, they would have a nice root system that would already be adapted to my type of medium, my type of environment, the quantity of moisture, humidity, and so on. Now, of course, this is not a rule, and you need to be a little bit balanced in this. Of course, if you buy a Masdevallia orchid in a cool season, but then you have a really hot summer, probably the extreme will be over the top and it will suffer no matter when you purchase it. But there are orchids who are more hardy and who can actually tolerate these temperatures at least for a shorter period of time. But I do believe that purchasing them and allowing them to adapt to your environment without having the stress of temperature will yield much better results than if you purchase an orchid in a totally not okay season. And it all boils down to the quantity of stress through which you put that orchid. Might as well try to minimize it. And that's what I intend to do with my orchids from now on. I purchased the Psychochyllus. I also purchased the Dendrobium Victoria Reginae. I do not know how it will do in my climate. I might discover that the summer is too much for it, but reading the articles, it can be hardy to those summers as well, as long as it is a strong orchid already adapted to other factors. So the only way for me to know if these orchids will do okay in my climate is to try them out. But at least maybe by me purchasing them in a not so extreme season will give them enough time to adapt and become stronger for the critical season. So that's the area that I want to explore in the future, and of course I will let you guys know if there is any difference, if this attitude will yield better results or not. And of course, if you do have experience with this, let me know down below what your experience has been. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you found this interesting, or at least a subject to investigate. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe for daily orchid and plants videos, and I'll see you all next time. Bye! So I went shopping and all the stores have Christmas decorations, and I bought myself some. Now these are not intended to bring the Christmas spirit to my greenhouse, but they are intended to avoid bird fatalities. So I'm hoping that by placing these on my glasses, they will become more visible, because that was not a nice experience.